The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in Fort Collins, Colorado, and Oliver Westfield stood at the train station with his heart hammering against his ribs like a wild Mustang trying to break free from a corral. He had never expected to become the kind of man who would send for a bride through correspondence, but 3 years of loneliness on his cattle ranch had worn him down like water against stone. The year was 1878, and the frontier was still rough enough that respectable women were scarce, especially ones willing to marry a cowboy whose hands were more familiar with rope and leather than fine china. The train whistle pierced the crisp autumn air, and Oliver straightened his best vest, the one without any visible mending. He had bathed that morning in the creek behind his property, scrubbing until his skin turned pink, and he had even trimmed his beard with shaking hands. The letters he had exchanged with Catherine Vaughn over the past 6 months had painted a picture of a sensible woman from Philadelphia, 22 years old, who had lost her parents to fever and found herself without prospects in a city that had grown cold and unforgiving. Her penmanship was elegant, her words thoughtful, and Oliver had allowed himself to imagine a partnership built on mutual respect, and perhaps, with time, something deeper. The train hissed to a stop, releasing clouds of steam that billowed across the platform like morning fog. Passengers began to disembark, and Oliver searched each face with growing anxiety. Businessmen in dark suits, a family with 3 rowdy children, an elderly couple holding hands but no young woman traveling alone. His stomach twisted with disappointment until he noticed her standing at the end of the platform, clutching a worn carpetbag with both hands. Catherine Vaughn was smaller than he had imagined, barely reaching his shoulder, with auburn hair pinned neatly beneath a simple bonnet. Her dress was gray wool, practical but threadbare at the cuffs, and her green eyes were wide as she took in the rough frontier town around her. She looked terrified, and something in Oliver's chest shifted at the sight of her vulnerability. "Miss Vaughn." He called out, removing his hat as he approached. She turned toward him and he watched her swallow hard before nodding. "Mr. Westfield." "Yes, madam. Welcome to Fort Collins." He gestured toward the carpetbag. "May I help you with your belongings?" "This is all I have," she said quietly, and there was a tremor in her voice that made Oliver want to promise her that everything would be all right, even though he knew the frontier made no such guarantees to anyone. They walked toward his wagon in silence, the wooden boardwalk creaking beneath their feet. Oliver had prepared 100 things to say during the ride from his ranch that morning, but now every word felt inadequate. He helped her onto the wagon seat, noting how she flinched slightly when his hand steadied her waist, as though she was not accustomed to being touched, even in courtesy. The journey to his ranch took nearly an hour, following a dusty road that wound through golden grasslands dotted with grazing cattle. Oliver pointed out landmarks as they traveled, trying to fill the awkward silence with information about the land, the weather patterns, the neighbors who lived 5 miles to the east. Catherine listened politely, her hands folded in her lap, but she said little. "I know this must be overwhelming," Oliver finally said, when they were halfway home and the silence had become unbearable. "Coming all this way to marry a stranger, I want you to know that I will do my best to be a good husband to you. I have a decent ranch, and the house is simple but solid. You will want for nothing that I can provide." Catherine turned to look at him then, and he was struck by the intelligence in her gaze. "Mr. Westfield, I appreciate your kindness. I should be honest with you, though. I am not the accomplished woman you might have hoped for. I can cook and sew and manage a household, but there are many things I never learned, things that a proper wife in this territory might be expected to know." "Such as?" Oliver asked, curious about what could make her look so troubled. "I cannot ride a horse," she admitted. "And I have never fired a gun, though I understand both skills are necessary here. I am afraid of large animals, which seems impractical for a ranch, and I cannot dance." The last confession came out almost as a whisper, as though it was the most shameful of all. Oliver found himself smiling despite the seriousness in her tone. "Well, Miss Vaughn, I can teach you to ride, and my foreman Jacob can teach you to shoot if you are willing to learn. As for the animals, they will grow familiar with time. And dancing," he paused, considering. "There will be a social gathering in town next month, a harvest dance. Everyone attends, and it would be expected that we would go as a married couple." Catherine's face paled. "I would embarrass you terribly. I have 2 left feet, according to my late mother. She despaired of ever teaching me." "Then I will teach you," Oliver said firmly. "Under the stars, where no one can see you stumble. The night sky is the finest dance hall in Colorado, and I promise you that I am a patient teacher." She looked at him with surprise, and something that might have been hope flickered across her features. "You would do that?" "I would," he confirmed. "We are partners now, Miss Vaughn, or we will be once the preacher says the words. Partners help each other learn what they need to know." They reached the ranch as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The house was a simple structure built from timber and stone, with a wide porch and a tin roof. Oliver had spent the previous week cleaning every surface, airing out the rooms and picking wildflowers to place in a jar on the kitchen table. He helped Catherine down from the wagon and watched nervously as she surveyed her new home. "It is lovely," she said, and he could hear that she meant it. "Much more substantial than I expected. I built it myself 5 years ago when I first claimed this land," Oliver explained with pride. "The walls are thick enough to keep out the winter cold, and the roof does not leak. I added the 2nd bedroom last year." He cleared his throat. "I thought you might appreciate having your own space until we are more comfortable with each other." Catherine's shoulders relaxed visibly. "That is very considerate, Mr. Westfield. Please call me Oliver, and may I call you Catherine?" "Yes, of course." She managed a small smile. "When is the wedding to take place?" "Tomorrow afternoon, if that suits you. The preacher, Reverend Thompson, will come here to the ranch. I thought you might prefer a quiet ceremony rather than having the whole town watching." "That would be perfect," Catherine said with obvious relief. Oliver showed her through the house, pointing out the kitchen with its cast iron stove, the sitting room with its simple furniture, and finally the bedroom that would be hers. He had placed clean linens on the bed and hung curtains at the window, small touches that he hoped would make her feel welcome. Catherine set down her carpet bag and turned to face him. "Thank you for your kindness," she said softly. "I know I am not what you imagined, but I promise to work hard and be a good wife to you." "You are exactly what I imagined," Oliver replied honestly. "A woman of courage and honesty. Those qualities matter more than dancing or riding horses." He left her to settle in and went to tend to the evening chores, his mind spinning with thoughts of the woman who would become his wife. When he returned to the house an hour later, he found Catherine in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, preparing a simple meal from the provisions in his pantry. The domesticity of the scene struck him with unexpected force. They ate together at the small wooden table, and Oliver found himself relaxing as Catherine asked questions about the ranch, the cattle, and his daily routine. She was intelligent and curious, and he appreciated that she seemed genuinely interested in understanding the life she was stepping into. "How did you come to own this land?" she asked as they finished their meal. "I worked as a ranch hand for nearly 10 years, saving every penny," Oliver explained. "When the Homestead Act passed, I filed my claim and started building. It has been hard work, but this place is mine, truly mine. That means something out here." "It means everything," Catherine agreed. "My father owned a small bookshop in Philadelphia, and it was his greatest pride. He built something from nothing, just as you have done." They talked until the stars emerged, bright and countless in the vast Colorado sky, and when Oliver finally bid Catherine good night, he felt a cautious optimism blooming in his chest. Perhaps this arrangement would work after all. The wedding ceremony the next afternoon was brief but sincere. Reverend Thompson spoke the traditional words while Oliver's foreman Jacob and the housekeeper from a neighboring ranch, Mrs. Henderson, served as witnesses. Catherine wore a simple dress of pale blue, and Oliver noticed that her hands trembled as she spoke her vows. He squeezed her fingers gently, offering silent reassurance, and saw gratitude flash in her eyes. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Oliver kissed Catherine's cheek chastely, not wanting to overwhelm her. She smelled of lavender soap, and her skin was soft as rose petals. They shared a modest meal with their guests, and then Oliver and Catherine were alone again as man and wife. The following weeks passed in a careful dance of adjustment. Catherine threw herself into managing the household with impressive efficiency, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast, tending to the vegetable garden, and transforming the ranch house into a true home. Oliver worked from sunrise to sunset with his cattle and horses, but he always made time to eat meals with Catherine and talk about their respective days. True to his word, Oliver began teaching Catherine to ride. He started her on his gentlest mare, a dappled gray named Daisy, and spent patient hours in the corral showing her how to sit properly, how to hold the reins, how to communicate with the horse through subtle shifts of weight and pressure. Catherine was nervous at first, stiffening every time Daisy moved unexpectedly, but she was also determined. Oliver admired her persistence as she practiced day after day, falling twice but climbing right back into the saddle. Jacob taught her to shoot with Oliver's old rifle, setting up tin cans on fence posts and coaching her through the basics of aim and breath control. Catherine proved to be a surprisingly good shot once she overcame her fear of the weapon's loud report. Oliver watched from a distance sometimes, pleased to see her growing confidence, but the dancing lessons were different. They were intimate in a way that the other skills were not, and both Oliver and Catherine seemed to sense it. 2 weeks after the wedding, as they cleared the dinner dishes together, Oliver finally broached the subject. "The harvest dance is in 2 weeks," he said carefully. "If you are still willing, we could begin your dancing lessons tonight. The weather is fine and the stars are already coming out." Catherine dried her hands on her apron and nodded slowly. "I am willing to try, but I warn you again that I am hopeless at this." "Impossible," Oliver said with a grin. "You learned to ride Daisy, and you can now shoot a can off a fence post at 20 yards. Dancing is easier than either of those things." They went outside as twilight deepened into night. The air was cool but not cold, and above them the stars stretched out in their eternal patterns. Oliver lit a lantern and hung it from a hook on the porch, casting a gentle glow over a flat area of packed earth that served as his yard. From inside the house, he retrieved a fiddle that had belonged to his father. "You play?" Catherine asked with surprise. "After a fashion," Oliver admitted. "Not well, but well enough for this purpose." He tucked the fiddle under his chin and drew the bow across the strings, producing a simple waltz melody. The music floated across the prairie, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered with its own song. Oliver set down the instrument and walked to where Catherine stood, clearly nervous. "First, we will just practice the position," he said gently. "May I?" She nodded, and he took her right hand in his left, placing his other hand lightly on her waist. Even through the fabric of her dress, he could feel the warmth of her body. "Now put your left hand on my shoulder," he instructed, and she complied, though her movements were stiff with anxiety. "The waltz is a simple pattern," Oliver explained. 3 beats moving in a square. "I will count for you. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Feel how I shift my weight." They began to move, and immediately Catherine stepped on his foot. "Oh, I am so sorry," she exclaimed, pulling back. "It is nothing," Oliver assured her. "Try again. Just feel the rhythm. Listen to my count. 1, 2, 3. They practiced for an hour that first night, and Catherine did step on his feet more times than Oliver could count, but he saw improvement. More importantly, he saw her begin to relax in his arms, her body gradually learning to follow his lead. When they finally stopped, both were slightly breathless and laughing. "You did well," Oliver said sincerely. "You are a kind liar," Catherine replied, but she was smiling. "Thank you for your patience." They made it a ritual after that, dancing under the stars every clear evening. Oliver would play a few bars on his father's fiddle to set the tempo, then set the instrument aside and take Catherine in his arms. Slowly, gradually, she began to understand the flow of the dance, anticipating his movements, relaxing into the rhythm. And as they danced, they talked, sharing stories from their pasts, revealing their hopes and fears. Oliver learned that Catherine's mother had died when she was 17, and her father had followed 3 years later, leaving her alone in a city that had grown increasingly hostile to single women without means. She had worked as a seamstress for a year, living in a boarding house where the landlady watched her every move, and the other residents treated her with suspicion. When she had seen Oliver's advertisement for a bride, it had felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Catherine learned that Oliver had left his family in Missouri at 16 after his father had died, and his older brother had made it clear that there was no place for him on the family farm. He had worked as a cowhand on various ranches, learning everything he could about cattle and horses and the business of ranching. He had been lonely for most of his adult life, but he had been building something, creating a foundation for a future he hoped to share with someone. "I want children," Oliver admitted one night as they swayed together under a particularly bright moon. "A house full of them, if God wills it. I want this ranch to be passed down through generations, to build a legacy that lasts beyond my own life." "I want that too," Catherine said softly. "I was an only child, and I always envied families with many children. The noise, the chaos, the love filling every corner of a house." As the lessons continued, something shifted between them. Oliver found himself thinking about Catherine throughout the day, looking forward to their evening dances with an anticipation that had nothing to do with the upcoming social event. He noticed small details about her. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the dimple that appeared in her left cheek when she smiled genuinely, the graceful movement of her hands as she worked. Catherine, for her part, found herself watching Oliver when he did not know she was looking. She admired the strength in his shoulders as he lifted heavy supplies, the gentle way he handled the horses, the quiet competence with which he managed his ranch. His patience with her had touched something deep inside her heart, and she realized that the gratitude she had initially felt was transforming into something warmer and more profound. 10 days before the harvest dance, Catherine finally managed to complete an entire waltz without stepping on Oliver's feet once. They were dancing in their usual spot, the stars brilliant overhead, when she realized she was not counting the steps anymore. Her body had learned the pattern, and she was simply following Oliver's lead naturally, flowing with him as though they were two parts of a single whole. "You are dancing," Oliver said with wonder in his voice. "Catherine, you are truly dancing." She looked up at him, her face flushed with pleasure and exertion, and found him gazing at her with an expression that made her heart skip. "I have a good teacher," she said breathlessly. "You have natural grace," Oliver countered. "You just needed someone to help you find it." They stopped moving, but Oliver did not release her. They stood frozen in the dance position, staring at each other as the night wind whispered through the grass around them. Oliver's hand tightened slightly on her waist, and Catherine's breath caught in her throat. "Catherine," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something. These past weeks, getting to know you, spending this time with you, it has changed things for me. You are no longer just a woman I married out of convenience. You have become important to me, precious to me." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "You have become precious to me as well," she whispered. "I came here expecting a business arrangement, a partnership of necessity, but I have found so much more. I have found a man of honor and kindness, a man I could love with my whole heart if he wanted such a thing from me." "I want exactly that," Oliver said fervently. He released her hand and her waist, only to cup her face gently between his palms. "I am falling in love with you, Catherine Westfield. Perhaps I have been falling since the moment I saw you on that train platform, looking so brave and so scared at the same time." "I am falling in love with you too," Catherine admitted, and saying the words aloud felt like stepping off a cliff into open air, terrifying and exhilarating at once. Oliver kissed her then, properly kissed her for the first time, and Catherine felt the world tilt beneath her feet. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than demanding, and she responded with all the emotion that had been building inside her for weeks. The kiss deepened, and Catherine's hands moved from his shoulder to tangle in his hair, pulling him closer. Oliver made a sound low in his throat and wrapped his arms around her, lifting her slightly off the ground. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Oliver rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "Come to my room tonight," he said quietly. "Be my wife in truth, not just in name." "Yes," Catherine answered without hesitation. "Yes, Oliver." They went inside together, hands clasped, and what passed between them that night was tender and passionate and entirely private. A joining of two souls who had found each other against all odds on the wild frontier. The morning after, Oliver woke with Catherine curled against his side, her auburn hair spread across his chest, and felt a contentment so profound it almost frightened him. She stirred as sunlight filtered through the window, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "Good morning, husband," she said, and her smile was radiant. "Good morning, wife," he replied, kissing her forehead. "I should get up and tend to the animals, but I find myself reluctant to leave this bed." "Then stay a little longer," Catherine suggested, trailing her fingers across his chest. "The cattle can wait a few more minutes." Those few minutes stretched into an hour, and when Oliver finally did leave the warmth of their bed, he did so with reluctance, already counting the hours until he could return to Catherine's arms. The days leading up to the harvest dance passed in a blur of happiness. Oliver and Catherine worked side by side during the days, managing the ranch together as true partners, and they spent their evenings in each other's arms, learning the topography of love with the same dedication Catherine had brought to learning to dance. They talked endlessly, discovering new layers to each other with every conversation, and they made love with increasing confidence and joy. The night of the harvest dance arrived cool and clear. Catherine wore her best dress, a deep green wool that Oliver had bought for her in town the week before, insisting that she needed something new for the occasion. She had pinned her hair up in an elaborate style, and when Oliver saw her, he felt his breath catch. "You are beautiful," he said simply. "The most beautiful woman in Colorado." "You are prejudiced," Catherine replied, but she blushed with pleasure. They drove into Fort Collins as the sun set, joining the stream of wagons and riders converging on the town hall where the dance was being held. Music spilled out into the street, fiddles and guitars, and a piano creating a lively melody that made Catherine's stomach flutter with nerves. "I am suddenly terrified again," she confessed as Oliver helped her down from the wagon. "What if I forget everything you taught me?" "You will not," Oliver assured her. "Your body knows the steps now. Trust yourself and trust me." The town hall was packed with people, ranchers and townspeople alike dressed in their finest clothes, eager for an evening of socializing and dancing after the hard work of the harvest season. Oliver led Catherine inside, keeping a protective hand on the small of her back. Several people called out greetings to him, and curious eyes turned toward Catherine with frank interest. "So this is your mail-order bride," a woman about Catherine's age said, approaching them with a friendly smile. "I am Sarah Miller. My husband owns the general store. Welcome to Fort Collins, Mrs. Westfield." "Thank you," Catherine replied, grateful for the warmth in Sarah's voice. "Please call me Catherine, and you must call me Sarah. Oh, I am so glad there is another young woman in the area. You must come to tea next week and tell me all about Philadelphia. I have always wanted to visit a big city." Oliver left Catherine talking with Sarah and went to greet some of his neighboring ranchers, but he kept her in sight the entire time, drawn to her like a compass needle to north. When the dancing began, he made his way back to her side immediately. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Westfield?" he asked formally, extending his hand. "You may, Mr. Westfield," Catherine replied, placing her hand in his. They moved onto the dance floor, joining the other couples, and as the music began, Catherine felt her nervousness evaporate. This was different from dancing under the stars, with people watching and the room warm and crowded, but the fundamentals were the same. Oliver's hand was steady at her waist, his lead clear and confident, and Catherine's body responded as naturally as breathing. They waltzed together, and Catherine realized she was not thinking about the steps at all. She was simply moving with Oliver, following the music, enjoying the sensation of floating across the floor in her husband's arms. She saw surprise and approval on the faces of the watching crowd, and she felt a surge of pride that she was doing well, that she was representing Oliver properly as his wife. "You are magnificent," Oliver murmured in her ear. "Everyone is watching us, admiring what a fine dancer you are." "It is all because of you," Catherine replied. "You taught me to trust myself." They danced 3 more dances together before Oliver reluctantly released her to dance with other partners, as was expected at such events. Catherine found herself passed from one rancher to another, all of them friendly and welcoming, and she navigated each dance successfully. But her eyes kept drifting back to Oliver, watching him dance with other women and feeling a possessive surge that surprised her with its intensity. When they finally came back together for the last waltz of the evening, Catherine sighed with relief. "I am ready to go home," she said. "I have had enough of sharing you with others." Oliver grinned. "I was thinking the same thing. Let us say our goodbyes and leave." They made their way around the room, thanking their hosts and promising to attend the next social event. Sarah Miller hugged Catherine warmly and extracted a promise that she would indeed come for tea the following week. Then they were outside in the cool night air, alone again. The ride back to the ranch was quiet but comfortable, both of them tired from the evening's exertion but content. Catherine leaned against Oliver's shoulder and he wrapped an arm around her, guiding the horses with one hand. "Thank you," Catherine said softly, "for teaching me to dance, for being patient with me, for making me feel like I belong here." "You do belong here," Oliver said firmly. "You belong with me, Catherine. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I thank God every day that you answered my advertisement." "I thank God too," Catherine replied. "I came here expecting so little, and I have found everything." When they arrived home, Oliver tended to the horses while Catherine changed into her nightgown. When he came to their bedroom, she was standing by the window, looking out at the stars that had witnessed their courtship. "I will never look at the night sky the same way again," she said, as Oliver wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Those stars watched us fall in love." "And they will watch us grow old together," Oliver replied, kissing the top of her head. "They will watch our children play in the yard and our grandchildren after them. This is our home, Catherine, our forever." As autumn deepened into winter, Catherine and Oliver settled into the rhythms of married life with increasing ease and joy. The physical distance that had marked their first weeks together had vanished entirely, replaced by an intimacy that extended beyond the bedroom into every aspect of their days. They worked together, laughed together, and made plans for the future with the confidence of two people who knew they had found their perfect match. In December, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a week or two, noting the changes in her body with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, but she waited until she was certain before telling Oliver. She chose a Sunday morning, after they had returned from church services in town, to share the news. "Oliver, I have something to tell you," she said as they sat together in front of the fireplace, the winter wind howling outside. He looked at her with immediate concern. "What is it? Are you well?" "I am very well," Catherine assured him, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Sometime next summer, if my calculations are correct." Oliver stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and Catherine felt a flutter of anxiety. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that made her laugh. "A baby," he exclaimed, pulling her into his arms. "Catherine, we are going to be parents. This is the best news I have ever received. You are happy then?" Catherine asked, though his reaction had made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Oliver said, cupping her face and kissing her soundly. "I am overjoyed, ecstatic, terrified, but mostly thrilled." "I am terrified too," Catherine admitted. "I know nothing about being a mother." "What if I do it wrong?" "You will not do it wrong," Oliver said confidently. "You have so much love to give, Catherine. Any child of ours will be blessed to have you as a mother." Winter passed slowly, the ranch locked in snow and cold, but the little house was warm and full of love. Oliver became even more protective of Catherine, insisting that she not overexert herself, and Catherine found his concern endearing even when it bordered on excessive. They spent long evenings planning for the baby, discussing names, and making plans to expand the house to accommodate their growing family. "I want to add another bedroom," Oliver said one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on Catherine's expanding belly. "And eventually, we will need more than that if we have as many children as we hope." "One at a time," Catherine said with a laugh. "Let us survive this first one before we plan for a dozen more." "A dozen might be ambitious," Oliver conceded, "but 5 or 6 seems reasonable." Spring arrived with a rush of green growth and new life throughout the ranch. The cattle produced healthy calves, the horses foaled, and Catherine's pregnancy advanced smoothly. She remained active, tending her garden and managing the household, but she moved more slowly now, careful with her precious burden. Sarah Miller became a good friend, visiting regularly and bringing gifts for the coming baby. She had 2 children of her own and was a source of practical advice and reassurance for Catherine's anxieties about childbirth and motherhood. "You will do beautifully," Sarah told Catherine one afternoon as they sat on the porch, snapping beans together. The first one is always scary, but women have been doing this since the beginning of time. Your body knows what to do, even if your mind is full of doubts. In July, when the heat pressed down on the prairie like a heavy blanket, Catherine went into labor. Oliver sent Jacob racing into town to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Henderson, while he stayed with Catherine, holding her hand and wiping the sweat from her forehead. "You are doing so well," he kept telling her, though his own face was pale with anxiety. "So strong, so brave." "This was your idea," Catherine gasped between contractions, but she managed a weak smile to show she was teasing. Mrs. Henderson arrived within the hour and took charge with the brisk efficiency of someone who had attended hundreds of births. She shooed Oliver out of the bedroom, ignoring his protests, and got to work helping Catherine through the long process of bringing new life into the world. Outside, Oliver paced the porch like a caged animal, flinching every time he heard Catherine cry out in pain. Jacob sat on the porch steps, whittling a piece of wood, and offered what comfort he could. "My wife went through this 3 times, the older man said. "It never gets easier to hear them in pain, but they are tougher than us men. She will be fine, boss." "She has to be," Oliver said roughly. "I cannot lose her, Jacob. She is everything to me." "You will not lose her," Jacob said with confidence. "She is strong, that wife of yours. I saw it the first day she arrived, the way she looked at this rough land and did not flinch." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, a new sound emerged from the bedroom. The thin, wavering cry of a newborn baby. Oliver froze on the porch, hardly daring to breathe, and then Mrs. Henderson appeared at the door, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Westfield," she announced. "A healthy baby boy, and your wife came through beautifully. Come and meet your child." Oliver rushed inside, his heart pounding, and found Catherine propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, and Oliver felt his own eyes burn with emotion. "Our son," she said softly. "Oliver, look at our son." Oliver sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving one impossibly small fist in the air. His eyes were closed, and his mouth was working as if already searching for nourishment. "He is perfect," Oliver whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's soft cheek with one finger. "Catherine, he is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Catherine asked. "We discussed so many names, but now that he is here I cannot remember any of them." "What about Thomas?" Oliver suggested. "After your father." Catherine's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Thomas Westfield." "Yes, that is perfect. Oh, Oliver, my father would have been so proud to meet his grandson." "And he would be proud of you," Oliver said, kissing her forehead. "You were so brave, so strong. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love another person." "I love you too," Catherine replied. "Thank you for bringing me here, for teaching me to dance under the stars, for giving me this beautiful life." Baby Thomas thrived, growing quickly and developing a personality that seemed equally composed of his mother's gentleness and his father's determination. Oliver proved to be a devoted father, taking on tasks that many men of the time would have considered beneath them. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Thomas during colicky nights, and spent hours simply watching his son sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. Catherine bloomed in motherhood, her natural nurturing instincts proving more than adequate to the task. She sang to Thomas in the same soft voice she had once used to count dance steps, and she chronicled every milestone in a journal Oliver had given her. As Thomas grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch prospered. Oliver expanded his cattle operation and built the additional bedrooms he had planned, anticipating the larger family they both wanted. When Thomas was 2 years old, Catherine became pregnant again, and this time the news was met with joy but not surprise. "Our family is growing," Oliver said, pulling Catherine close one evening as they watched Thomas play with wooden blocks on the floor. "I am the luckiest man alive." "We are both lucky," Catherine corrected. "I think of the frightened woman I was when I stepped off that train, and I can hardly recognize her now. You helped me become who I was meant to be." "No," Oliver said gently. "You were always this person. I just helped you see it in yourself." Their second child arrived in the spring, a daughter with Catherine's auburn hair and Oliver's blue eyes. They named her Margaret after Oliver's mother, and Thomas was fascinated by his tiny sister, wanting to help with everything. 2 years later, another son arrived named Samuel. Then another daughter, Ruth. Each birth brought renewed wonder and joy, and the house that had once seemed too large for one lonely cowboy became filled with the sounds of children laughing, playing, and occasionally arguing. Catherine often thought back to those early dancing lessons under the stars, the foundation upon which their love had been built. Oliver had taught her so much more than how to waltz. He had taught her to trust herself, to embrace challenges, to believe that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. And she had taught him that love could fill the empty spaces in a person's heart, that family was the truest form of wealth, and that a house became a home when filled with affection. Years passed, and the children grew. Thomas became a serious, responsible boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the business of ranching with keen interest. Margaret was spirited and adventurous, always climbing trees and racing her horse across the meadows. Samuel was gentle and thoughtful, preferring books to outdoor work, but still pulling his weight on the ranch. Ruth was the baby, sweet and charming, able to wrap her father around her little finger with a single smile. When Thomas turned 15, Oliver and Catherine celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary. The years had been kind to them both. Oliver's beard now showed streaks of gray, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but he was still strong and vital. Catherine's figure had softened with 4 pregnancies, but she moved with the same grace Oliver had first coaxed out of her on those starlit dancing lessons. They threw a party for the anniversary, inviting all the neighbors and friends they had accumulated over the years. Sarah Miller was there with her grown children. Jacob, now retired but still living in a cabin on Oliver's land, told stories about the early days of the ranch. The house overflowed with food, laughter, and music. As the evening progressed, someone called for Oliver and Catherine to dance. A space was cleared in the main room, and someone brought out a fiddle. Oliver bowed formally to Catherine, just as he had at the harvest dance 17 years earlier. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Westfield?" he asked. "Always, Mr. Westfield," Catherine replied, placing her hand in his. They moved into the familiar waltz position, and as the music started, Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. They moved together with the ease of long practice, 2 people who knew each other's rhythms as well as they knew their own. Around them, their children watched with interest and their friends smiled with affection. "You remember the first time we danced like this?" Oliver murmured. "Under the stars, with you insisting you had 2 left feet." "I remember every moment of those lessons," Catherine replied. "That is when I started to fall in love with you, though I did not realize it at the time. Your patience, your kindness, the way you believed in me when I did not believe in myself." "I fell in love with you on the train platform," Oliver admitted. "The moment I saw you standing there, trying to be brave when you were terrified. I thought then that you were the most courageous woman I had ever seen, and I have spent 17 years confirming that first impression." The song ended, but they remained in each other's arms, swaying slightly to music only they could hear. Their children applauded, and Margaret called out, "Tell us the story again, Mama, about how you learned to dance." Catherine laughed and stepped back, looking around at the gathered crowd. "It is a simple story, really. I came to Colorado as a mail-order bride, terrified and uncertain, knowing nothing about this frontier life. I confessed to your father that I could not dance, and he said then he would teach me under the stars. And he did, night after night, until I learned not just to dance but to trust, to hope, and to love. Best decision I ever made," Oliver added, pulling Catherine close again. "Teaching my bride to dance under the Colorado stars, though I think she taught me far more than I ever taught her." As the party continued around them, Oliver and Catherine slipped outside for a moment of privacy. They walked hand in hand to the spot where they had held those first dancing lessons, now well worn from years of feet passing over it. The stars above were the same stars that had witnessed their courtship, eternal and unchanging. "You ever regret it?" Oliver asked, not because he doubted but because he wanted to hear her answer. "Coming all this way, marrying a stranger, building a life in this rough land?" "Never," Catherine said firmly, turning to face him and placing her hands on his chest. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I needed, Oliver. A home, a family, a purpose. But most importantly, you gave me yourself. Your love has been the greatest gift of my life." "And yours has been mine," Oliver replied, kissing her softly. "Every day with you has been a blessing. Watching you become a mother, seeing you manage this ranch alongside me, growing old with you. These have been the best years of my life." They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the party inside the house, their children's voices raised in laughter. The ranch stretched out around them, hundreds of acres that they had built into a thriving operation through hard work and determination. But none of it would have meant anything without the love they shared. "Dance with me," Catherine said suddenly. "Right here, right now, under the stars like we used to." "There is no music," Oliver pointed out, but he was already moving into position. "We do not need music," Catherine replied. "We never really did." They waltzed together in the darkness, moving to a rhythm that existed only between them, and Catherine thought that this was what true partnership looked like. Two people who had started as strangers, who had learned to trust each other step by step, who had built a life together that was richer than either could have imagined alone. The years continued their steady march forward. The children grew into adults, each finding their own path while remaining connected to the family and the ranch. Thomas eventually took over the day-to-day management of the cattle operation, proving to be as capable a rancher as his father. Margaret married a neighboring rancher's son and moved to a property just a few miles away, close enough to visit regularly. Samuel went away to study law but returned to Fort Collins to practice, becoming an advocate for homesteaders' rights. Ruth, the baby, showed a gift for teaching and opened a small school on the ranch property, educating not just her own younger siblings but children from the surrounding area. Oliver and Catherine became grandparents, a role they embraced with enthusiasm. Catherine taught her grandchildren to bake bread and tend gardens, while Oliver showed them how to ride horses and rope cattle. And sometimes, on clear evenings, Oliver would bring out his father's old fiddle, and Catherine would gather the grandchildren around her. "Tell us about when Grandpa taught you to dance," they would beg, and Catherine would smile and recount the story they never tired of hearing. About a frightened mail-order bride who could not dance, and a patient cowboy who offered to teach her under the stars. About how love could bloom in the most unexpected places, given time and care and faith. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Oliver and Catherine took a trip to Denver, leaving the ranch in Thomas's capable hands for a week. It was the farthest Catherine had traveled since arriving in Colorado 3 decades earlier, and she marveled at how much the territory had changed. Colorado had become a state 2 years after her arrival, and civilization had slowly crept across the landscape she remembered as wild and untamed. But she found she did not miss the wildness. What she valued was the life she and Oliver had built, the family they had raised, the love that had grown stronger with each passing year rather than fading as some marriages did. In Denver, they attended the opera, something Catherine had not experienced since her youth in Philadelphia. They stayed in a fine hotel and ate in restaurants with white tablecloths and crystal glasses. It was a lovely trip, but Catherine found herself eager to return home to their ranch, to the life they had created together. "I am not meant for city life anymore," she told Oliver as they rode the train back to Fort Collins. "The noise, the crowds. I found myself missing the sound of the wind through the grass, the sight of our mountains against the sky." "I felt the same," Oliver admitted. "I kept thinking about the ranch, wondering if Thomas remembered to check the fence line in the north pasture, whether Margaret needed help with her new foal. We have become old ranch folk, set in our ways." "I would not have it any other way," Catherine said contentedly, leaning her head on his shoulder. As they entered their 4th decade of marriage, slowing down became inevitable. Oliver's joints ached on cold mornings, and he handed over more and more responsibility to Thomas, though he still rode out to check on the cattle most days. Catherine's eyesight dimmed, making her detailed sewing work more difficult, but she still managed the household and welcomed the constant stream of children and grandchildren who filled the house with life and noise. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Catherine remarked, "We have had a good life, have we not?" "The best life," Oliver agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible when I sent that advertisement to the Philadelphia newspaper." "And better than I imagined when I answered it," Catherine added. "I was so frightened that day on the train platform. I had no idea that I was traveling toward everything I had ever wanted." "Fate works in mysterious ways," Oliver said. "Or perhaps it was not fate at all, but God putting us in each other's paths because He knew we were meant to be together." "Either way, I am grateful," Catherine said. She reached for Oliver's hand and he clasped it warmly. "Thank you for teaching me to dance, Oliver. For being patient with me, for believing in me, for loving me." "Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely cowboy," Oliver replied. "For making this house a home, for giving me a family, for being my partner in all things. You are the best decision I ever made, Catherine Westfield." They sat together as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had witnessed their first uncertain steps together so many years ago. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their voices carrying on the evening air. Smoke rose from the chimney of Thomas's house, where their oldest son lived with his wife and 4 children. Margaret's ranch was visible as a distant cluster of lights to the east. Samuel would be closing his law office in town, preparing to ride out for his weekly family dinner. And Ruth was inside their own house, finishing preparations for the evening meal, her clear voice humming a tune that Catherine recognized as the waltz melody Oliver had played during those long-ago dancing lessons. "Tell me," Oliver said suddenly, "if you could go back to that young woman on the train platform, knowing everything you know now, what would you tell her?" Catherine considered the question carefully. "I would tell her that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. I would tell her that love is not something you fall into, but something you build, day by day, choice by choice. And I would tell her that the cowboy waiting for her at the Fort Collins station is going to change her life in ways she cannot begin to imagine, all of them wonderful. I might tell that young cowboy a few things too, Oliver mused. I would tell him that the nervous woman with the worn carpetbag is going to be the making of him, that she will teach him as much as he teaches her, that together they will build something that lasts, something worth all the hardship and struggle. "Do you think they would believe us?" Catherine asked with a smile. "Probably not," Oliver admitted. "Some things you have to live to understand, but they would figure it out just as we did. One dance at a time." As the years advanced, Oliver's health began to decline more noticeably. The hard life of ranching took its toll, and though his spirit remained strong, his body grew weaker. Catherine nursed him through bouts of illness with the same devotion he had shown her during her 4 pregnancies and beyond. Their children worried, but Oliver refused to be treated as an invalid. "I have lived a full life," he told Thomas when his son tried to convince him to rest more. "I am not going to spend my remaining years sitting in a chair watching the world pass by. I will work this ranch until the day I die, and that is final." Catherine understood. The ranch was as much a part of Oliver as his own heartbeat, and asking him to give it up would be like asking him to stop breathing. So she supported his determination, while quietly making things easier for him where she could, enlisting their sons to handle the most physically demanding tasks without making Oliver feel useless. On a clear September evening, when Oliver was 68 years old and Catherine was 65, they sat together on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "Dance with me," Oliver said suddenly, standing and extending his hand to Catherine. "Out here." "Now?" Catherine asked with surprise, though she was already rising to join him. "Right here, right now," Oliver confirmed. "I want to dance with my bride under the stars, just like we did in the beginning." They moved into position, and even though both of them were slower now, their bodies still remembered the patterns worn into muscle memory over decades. Oliver began to hum the old waltz melody, and they swayed together in the gathering darkness. "I love you," Oliver said softly. "Every day, every moment, I love you more than I did the day before. You have made my life complete, Catherine." "And you have made mine," Catherine replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Whatever comes, we have had the greatest love story, Oliver. Ours may not be written in books, but it is written in the land we cultivated, the children we raised, the life we built together." They danced until the stars filled the sky completely, and when they finally stopped, Oliver pulled Catherine close and held her for a long moment. "Promise me," he said quietly, "that when I am gone you will keep living, keep dancing, keep filling this house with love and laughter." "Do not talk of such things," Catherine protested, but Oliver placed a gentle finger against her lips. "Promise me," he insisted. "I need to know that you will be all right." "I promise," Catherine whispered, though the thought of life without Oliver felt impossible. "But you are not going anywhere yet. We still have years ahead of us." Oliver smiled but said nothing, and they went inside to join their family for dinner. 2 weeks later, Oliver went out one morning to check on a pregnant mare and did not return. When Thomas went looking for him, he found his father sitting peacefully beneath a cottonwood tree, his eyes closed, his hand resting on the neck of the mare who had successfully delivered her foal. The doctor said later that his heart had simply stopped, that he had died instantly and without pain. Catherine was devastated by the loss, but she held herself together for the sake of their children and grandchildren. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, testament to the respect Oliver had earned over his decades in Colorado. Catherine stood dry-eyed throughout the service, her hand gripping Margaret's tightly, and when they lowered Oliver into the ground on a hillside overlooking his beloved ranch, she whispered a private goodbye. The weeks after Oliver's death were the hardest of Catherine's life. The house felt too empty, too quiet, even when filled with well-meaning family members. She found herself listening for his footsteps, turning to share something with him only to remember he was gone. At night, the bed felt vast and cold without his warmth beside her. But she had made a promise, and Catherine Westfield had never broken a promise in her life. She rose each morning and found reasons to keep going. She helped Ruth with the school, teaching reading to the youngest children. She baked bread for Thomas's family and tended her garden with the same care she always had. She welcomed her grandchildren with open arms and told them stories about their grandfather, keeping his memory alive through words and love. On clear evenings, Catherine would walk to the spot where Oliver had first taught her to dance. She would stand there alone, remembering the feeling of his hand at her waist, his patient voice counting out the rhythm, the way he had looked at her with such love in his eyes. Sometimes she would hum the old waltz melody and sway gently, dancing with the memory of the man who had changed her life. Catherine lived for another 12 years after Oliver's death, long enough to see all her grandchildren grow into adults and to meet several great-grandchildren. She remained active and engaged, a respected matriarch who held the family together with her quiet strength and endless love. But everyone could see that a part of her had died with Oliver, that she was simply waiting for the day when she could join him again. That day came on a spring morning when Catherine was 77 years old. Ruth found her mother in her bed, peaceful and still, a smile on her lips and her hand extended as though reaching for someone. On the bedside table was Oliver's old photograph, the one taken on their 10th anniversary, showing a young couple standing close together, happiness evident in every line of their faces. They buried Catherine beside Oliver on the hillside, and their headstone reads simply, "Oliver and Catherine Westfield, beloved parents and grandparents, together in life and death." At the funeral, Ruth stood before the gathered mourners and told the story her mother had told countless times, about a mail-order bride who could not dance and a cowboy who offered to teach her under the stars. "Their love was not the dramatic kind you read about in novels," Ruth said, her voice steady despite her tears. "It was the everyday kind, built on patience and kindness and mutual respect. It was the kind of love that lasts because it is tended carefully, nurtured through good times and bad." They danced together for 47 years, and now they are dancing together still, under stars brighter than any we can see here. The ranch remained in the family for generations, passed down from Thomas to his children and beyond. The house was expanded and modernized over the decades, but the original structure that Oliver built remained at its heart. And on the hillside where Oliver and Catherine were buried, their descendants would sometimes gather on clear evenings to watch the sunset and remember the story of the mail-order bride and the cowboy who taught her to dance under the stars, a love story that became the foundation for everything that followed. In town, the general store that Sarah Miller's husband had owned became a historical landmark, and eventually someone had the idea to create a small museum dedicated to the early settlers of Fort Collins. Among the exhibits was a display about mail-order brides, featuring letters that Catherine had written to a friend back east in her early years in Colorado. Visitors would read her words describing her first dance lessons with Oliver, her growing love for the frontier, and her gratitude for the life she had found. and they would leave with a better understanding of the courage it took to build a life in the Wild West. Thomas's grandson, also named Oliver, was working on the ranch one evening when he was 25 years old, facing a decision about his future. He had been offered a job in Denver with a large cattle company, a prestigious position that would have moved him away from the family ranch. Uncertain about what to do, he walked up the hillside to his great-great-grandparents' graves and sat down on the grass between the headstones. "I do not know what to do," he said aloud, feeling slightly foolish but also comforted by the familiar spot. "The job in Denver is everything I thought I wanted, but leaving the ranch feels wrong. How do I know which choice is right?" The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers, and young Oliver felt a strange peace settle over him. He thought about the stories he had heard all his life, about the original Oliver who had built this ranch from nothing, and Catherine who had traveled across the country to become his bride. They had chosen love, family, and hard work over comfort or prestige. They had built something lasting by investing in what mattered most. The answer became clear. Young Oliver turned down the job in Denver and stayed on the ranch, eventually taking over its management from his aging father. He met a woman at a church social, a teacher from town, and courted her with the same patient devotion his great-great-grandfather had shown. When he proposed, he brought her to the hillside and told her the whole story of Oliver and Catherine, wanting her to understand the legacy she would be joining. "I want to build that kind of love with you," he told her earnestly. "The kind that lasts, that grows stronger instead of weaker over time. The kind that builds a legacy worth passing down." She said yes, and their wedding was held on the ranch, with the ceremony taking place in sight of the hillside where Oliver and Catherine rested. As part of the celebration, young Oliver insisted on having a dance under the stars, just as his ancestors had done. He had learned to play the fiddle specifically for this purpose, and as he and his new bride danced to the old waltz melody, their family members watching with tears and smiles, the circle of time seemed to complete itself. The wind carried the music across the prairie, past the house that Oliver had built and Catherine had made into a home, past the corrals where generations of horses had been trained, across the grasslands where countless cattle had grazed. And if the stars shining overhead could have spoken, they might have whispered that love like this, built on patience and trust and genuine partnership, never truly dies. It echoes through time, inspiring each new generation to reach for something lasting, something real. In a small box in the main house, carefully preserved through the decades, was Catherine's journal from her first years in Colorado. Her descendants would sometimes read it, marveling at her elegant handwriting and thoughtful observations. One entry, dated a month after her first dancing lesson with Oliver, read, "Tonight we danced again under the stars, and I realized something profound. Oliver is not just teaching me the steps of a waltz. He is teaching me to trust, to take risks, to believe that I am capable of more than I ever imagined. With each dance, I feel myself becoming someone new, someone stronger and braver, or perhaps I am simply becoming who I always was beneath the fear and doubt. Either way, I know that I am falling in love with him, this patient cowboy who saw something in me worth nurturing. Whatever our future holds, I will be forever grateful for these starlit dancing lessons, these moments of pure connection and possibility." And in Oliver's own journal, preserved beside Catherine's, was his entry from that same night. "Taught Catherine the waltz again this evening. She is improving rapidly, though she still does not believe in her own grace. Watching her face as she concentrates, feeling her gradually relax in my arms, I find myself falling deeper in love with each passing moment. She came here as a practical solution to my loneliness, but she has become so much more. She is my partner, my companion, the missing piece I did not know I was searching for. I would teach her to dance every night for the rest of my life if it means holding her close and watching her blossom into the confident, capable woman I see emerging. She thinks I am teaching her, but the truth is we are teaching each other. She is showing me what it means to have a true partner, someone to share not just the work but the joy and sorrow of life. I am the luckiest man in Colorado, possibly in the entire frontier. These journals became treasured family heirlooms, passed down through the generations as reminders of the foundation upon which the family had been built. Whenever the descendants faced challenges in their own marriages, they would read these entries and remember that lasting love was built through patience, communication, and daily choice. The ranch itself continued to prosper and evolve with the times. What had started as a modest cattle operation grew into a thriving multi-generational enterprise. But the core values Oliver and Catherine had established remained constant. Hard work, integrity, love of land and family, and the belief that a person could always learn and grow given patience and proper teaching. In the town of Fort Collins, as it grew from a rough frontier settlement into a proper city, the Westfield name became synonymous with community leadership and generosity. The family funded a library, supported the school system, and helped their neighbors through hard times without seeking recognition or repayment. They were simply living out the values Oliver and Catherine had modeled, treating others with the same kindness and respect they had shown each other. And every generation made sure to teach their children to dance, passing down not just the steps of the waltz but the story behind it. Young Westfields learned early that dancing was about more than music and movement. It was about trust, partnership, and the willingness to be vulnerable with another person. It was about patience with yourself and your partner as you both learned and grew. It was about creating something beautiful together that neither could create alone. The story of the mail-order bride who could not dance and the cowboy who taught her under the stars became woven into the fabric of the family's identity, a reminder of where they came from and what they valued. It was told at weddings and anniversaries, shared with new family members joining through marriage, and passed down to each new generation as a precious inheritance more valuable than land or money. Because at its heart, the story was about more than just Oliver and Catherine. It was about the courage required to build a life in an uncertain world, the power of patience and kindness, and the extraordinary things that become possible when two people commit to learning and growing together. It was about taking chances on love, trusting in partnership, and believing that with time and care, even the most uncertain beginnings can blossom into something magnificent. The stars that had witnessed Oliver and Catherine's first dance continued to shine over the Colorado prairie, as they had for millennia, and would for millennia more. Beneath their ancient light, the ranch that Oliver built and Catherine made into a home thrived and grew, sheltering generation after generation of the family they had founded. And sometimes, on clear nights, if you stood very still on that hillside where they were buried, you could almost hear the faint strains of a fiddle playing an old waltz melody, and see two figures dancing together in the starlight, together for eternity just as they had been in life. The end.